These machines didn't just cut trees, they demolished entire forests in a single shift. One could harvest 2 trees every 60 seconds. Another weighed as much as a loaded freight train car and still moved through mountainsides like it owned them. They were the most powerful logging machines ever built. And then, one by one, they were killed off by corporate decisions, budget cuts, and the next big thing. Number 1. The Garrett Tree Farmer Skidder. Let's start with the machine that changed everything about how logs moved through a forest. The Garrett Tree Farmer. Dwight Garrett designed the first tree farmer skidder in 1949. And by the early 1950s, production models were hitting timber operations across North America. Before this machine existed, skidding, the process of dragging felled trees from the cutting site to a landing where they could be loaded and hauled, was done with horses, tractors, or brute human labor. It was slow, backbreaking, and dangerous. The tree farmer rewrote the rule book. It was a rubber-tired, articulated machine, meaning it bent in the middle to steer rather than using traditional steering wheels like a car or tractor. That articulated design gave it the ability to maneuver through dense timber and rough terrain that a rigid-framed machine simply could not handle. At its rear, a hydraulic grapple could clamp down on a pile of logs, close like a set of steel jaws, and the operator could reverse the machine right up to a bunch of felled trees, grab them, and drive out. No climbing in and out of the cab, no choker cables to attach by hand, no wasted time. Early models ran on small Ford gasoline engines, but the machines quickly grew into larger diesel-powered versions. By the time the tree farmer was in widespread use in the late 1950s and into the 1960s, it was fundamentally reshaping how logging crews worked. In the Pacific Northwest, Garrett is broadly credited with popularizing the rubber-tired log skidder as a concept. The machines were tough, built with thick plate steel, planetary axles for massive torque output, and hydraulic systems that could handle the punishment of daily forest work. The Garrett design became so influential that when other manufacturers rushed into the rubber-tired skidder market in the late 1960s, companies like Pettibone, Franklin, Cancar, International Harvester, Timberjack, and John Deere, they were essentially following the template Garrett had already established. But Garrett, the original pioneer, couldn't hold on against the wave of larger, better-funded manufacturers. The Tree Farmer brand eventually passed from Garrett to Franklin, which bought it in 1990 and ran both lines until Franklin itself shut down in 2000. The original Garrett machines are now museum pieces, rare, rusted relics found occasionally in Australian fields and remote American forests. They run on 2-stroke Detroit diesel engines that sound like nothing else alive. Mechanics who still know how to work on them are rarer than the machines themselves. Number 2. The Timberjack 200 series skidder. In the 1950s, 2 men in Woodstock, Ontario, Wes McGill and Robert Simmons, built something that the logging world had never quite seen before. They called their company Timberland Machines, and what they produced was an articulated 4-wheel drive tractor with a winch at the back. When Timberland released the Timberjack 200 series skidder, it came with a 61-horsepower Ford gasoline engine and carried a suggested list price of $8,925. That price tag was significant. It meant a small or mid-sized logging operation could afford one, and what they were buying was a purpose-built machine, not a converted farm tractor, not a repurposed construction dozer, but a skidder designed from the ground up to do one thing: move logs. The articulated design, bending in the middle to steer, gave these machines something tracked crawlers of the era couldn't offer: speed and maneuverability on rough terrain without tearing up the forest floor the way a steel-tracked machine would. The winch at the rear could be loaded up with multiple logs, and the whole package moved through logging roads faster than anything that had come before in the skidder category. This machine launched an entire brand dynasty. Timberjack would go on to become one of the most respected names in forestry equipment history, eventually being purchased by the Finnish forestry conglomerate Rauma Repola in the 1980s, then acquired by John Deere in April 2000 for $570 million. But the original 200 series, simple, tough, affordable, was the seed that grew into all of it. It was replaced by more powerful, more capable machines as the decades passed. But loggers who worked with the early Timberjacks will tell you that the simplicity of those machines was their greatest strength. They were built from off-the-shelf components that any mechanically inclined operator could fix with basic tools in the field. As machines got more sophisticated and proprietary, that advantage disappeared. Number 3. The Wagner articulated log skidder prototypes. Here's a machine most people have never heard of, but one that was arguably decades ahead of its time. The Wagner brothers of Portland, Oregon, a company that would later split into FWD Wagner, Scoopmobile, and Wagner Mining Scoop, built several early prototypes of rubber-tired log skidders in the mid-1950s. These machines were not production models sold commercially in large numbers. They were custom-built, special-order machines that a handful of logging operations in the Pacific Northwest actually used for years. What made the Wagner machines extraordinary was what they had under the skin. While other early skidders of that era were bare-bones mechanical contraptions, the Wagner prototypes featured air brakes, automatic transmissions, and differential locks. These were features that would not become standard on production skidders for another decade or more. Wagner is also broadly credited with perfecting the articulated design concept for heavy equipment, the idea of splitting a machine in two around a central pivot point that later became fundamental to virtually every skidder, loader, and many other heavy machines built in the following half-century. The problem that killed the Wagner skidders was not engineering. It was tires. In the mid-1950s, large, low-pressure tires capable of providing the flotation needed for soft forest ground simply did not exist. The only large tires available were high-pressure mining truck tires, extremely tough and durable, but terrible for forest conditions, where a machine needs to float over soft ground rather than sink into it. Two of the Wagner prototypes acquired by the Van Natta brothers logging operation in the Pacific Northwest were still running with their original tires decades later. A testament to the construction quality, but the tire limitation meant the design never went into mass production. When low-pressure agricultural tires, large enough for skidder-sized machines, finally became available in the 1960s, other manufacturers moved in to fill the gap. Wagner had identified. The Wagner concept succeeded. The Wagner machines themselves were retired. Number 4. The Prentice log loader. Leo Heikkinen changed the way logs got loaded onto trucks when he introduced the first hydraulic knuckle boom loader under the Prentice brand. This was a pivotal piece of machinery, a hydraulic crane arm with a grapple on the end, mounted on a machine that could pivot and reach to stack and load logs with precision that no cable crane or manual loading operation could match. Before the hydraulic knuckle boom loader, getting logs from a landing onto a truck was a laborious, dangerous process involving cables, makeshift rigging, and enormous physical risk. Heikkinen's Prentice loader made it fast, safe, and consistent. The Prentice brand became one of the dominant loader names in the North American logging industry throughout the 1960s, 1970s. It was eventually acquired by Omark Industries, then changed hands again when Blount International purchased both the Prentice line and other forestry brands, attempting to consolidate the market under a single operation. The final death blow came when Caterpillar acquired certain assets of Blount's forestry equipment operation in 2007 and retired the Prentice name entirely. By that point, Prentice represented decades of institutional knowledge, engineering development, and deep loyalty from North American logging operators, all of which was quietly shelved when Caterpillar decided it no longer fit the portfolio. The Prentice knuckle boom's basic concept, the hydraulic grapple loader, survived and thrives in the logging industry to this day. The Prentice brand itself did not. Number 5. The Franklin Lugger Skidder. Roger Drake built the first Franklin Lugger skidder in 1962 in Franklin, Virginia. Before getting into the skidder business directly, Drake had been an agent distributing Pettibone, a rigid-frame rubber-tired skidder of the era. He saw the limitations of that design and decided to build something better. What he produced was articulated, rubber-tired, and diesel-powered, becoming one of the first manufacturers to power skidders with diesel engines at a time when gasoline engines were still common. Drake pushed hard on multiple fronts simultaneously. He offered grapple models in the 1960s when most skidders still relied on cable winches. He built one of the first skidders specifically designed for wet, soft terrain, and he developed a forwarder at a time when most competitors hadn't even considered the concept. By the 1980s, the Franklin Lugger line was arguably the most complete range of skidding equipment available from any single manufacturer. Cable skidders, grapple skidders, forwarders, feller bunchers, and site preparation machines all carried the Franklin name. Drake famously turned down repeated buyout offers from larger manufacturers throughout his 3 decades of building the business. Franklin eventually acquired the Garrett Tree Farmer brand in 1990, adding that historic name to its portfolio. But after Drake's era wound down, the company could not sustain itself against John Deere, Caterpillar, and the other corporate giants that now dominated the market. Franklin shut down in 2010, ending nearly 5 decades of independent American logging equipment manufacturing and taking with it both the Franklin and Tree Farmer names. In the 50-year window of 1950 to 2000, the Franklin logger represented exactly what a strong, innovative, independent manufacturer could build. Its replacement was not a better machine. It was a better funded corporation. Number 6. The Clark Ranger Skidder. The Clark Ranger was one of the most durable and respected skidder names in the industry throughout the 1960s, 1980s. Clark Equipment Company, a major American manufacturer of forklifts, loaders, and industrial machinery, brought serious engineering resources to the forestry market, and the Ranger line benefited from that. Clark Ranger skidders competed directly with Timberjack, John Deere, and Caterpillar's offerings in the full tree logging market. They were known for their reliability and were particularly popular in regions of Canada and the northern United States, where full tree logging operations drove massive volumes of wood through the system. But the Clark Ranger's story, after Clark itself, is a lesson in how a good machine can be passed around corporate ownership until it simply disappears. When Clark exited the forestry market, the Ranger brand was sold to VME, a joint venture between Volvo and Michigan, 2 construction equipment makers. VME then sold it to Valmet, the Finnish forestry and paper machinery company. Valmet sold it to Allied Systems, and Allied Systems eventually stopped skidder production entirely. A brand that had spent decades earning the trust of professional loggers across North America was handed from company to company until no one was left who cared enough to keep building it. The Ranger name survived each sale, only to die a quiet death at the end of the chain. By the time Allied stopped producing skidders, the Clark Ranger had been gone in anything but name for years. Number 7. The Koehring Waterous feller buncher and sawhead. Koehring Waterous, based in Brantford, Ontario, Canada, occupies a specific and critical place in logging history. Its engineers designed the first practical disc sawhead for feller bunchers. Before the disc sawhead, feller bunchers used shear heads, powerful steel jaws that crushed and sheared a tree off at the base. Shear heads worked, but they caused splintering and damage at the cut end of the log, which meant the bottom section often couldn't be used for lumber. A sheared log was fine for pulp, but it lost value for higher-grade applications. Koehring engineer John Deere developed the rotating circular disc sawhead that could cut a tree off at the base cleanly, like a chainsaw, but at the end of a massive hydraulic boom, operable entirely from inside an armored cab. The disc sawhead opened feller bunchers to the full lumber market. Clean-cut logs meant maximum value. The industry took notice. Koehring Waterous feller bunchers equipped with this sawhead technology dominated the Canadian logging market and made significant inroads into the United States throughout the 1970s and early 1980s. Then, in 1988, Timberjack acquired the construction equipment component of Koehring. The engineers, including Koehring and Tony Yerocki, who had developed the feller buncher sawhead, suddenly found themselves without jobs. Their departure from Koehring had a direct consequence. Yerocki went on to help found Tigercat Industries in 1992, which entered the market specifically to fill the gap left by Koehring's absorption. Tigercat grew into one of the most respected names in modern forestry equipment. Koehring's own legacy was swallowed into the Timberjack brand and eventually dissolved into John Deere. The sawhead technology survived everywhere. The Koehring name did not. Number 8. The Hydro-Axe Wheeled Feller Buncher. The Hydro-Axe Wheeled Feller Buncher was the invention of Carol Nelson and Len Vicina, who developed a hydrostatic drive system for a wheeled feller buncher that gave operators a level of control and precision that previous machines simply didn't offer. Hydrostatic drive. a system where the engine powers a hydraulic pump that drives hydraulic motors at the wheels, rather than connecting the engine to the wheels through a mechanical transmission, gave the hydroax machines exceptional low-speed control and the ability to push against trees with precise, measured force. The operator could inch the machine forward, hold it against a tree while the cutting head did its work, and back out smoothly, all with far more control than a conventional mechanical drive system allowed. In the pine forests of the American Southeast, where wheeled feller bunchers work on relatively firm ground and need to move fast between trees, the hydroax machines became the dominant platform through the 1970s. Loggers in the South ran these machines hard and built their entire harvest systems around them. A hydroax on good ground could keep 2 grapple skidders busy behind it. That's how fast it worked. But once again, corporate consolidation ended what engineering had built. Blount International bought Hydroax and rebranded the entire line as Prentice, the loader brand it had also acquired. The Hydroax identity was gone. When Caterpillar bought out Blount's forestry assets in 2007, both the Prentice-labeled Hydroax line and other brands in the portfolio were discontinued entirely. Operators who had built their businesses around Hydroax equipment were left with machines they could no longer get factory support for. Salvage yards in the American South today still carry more used Hydroax feller buncher parts than almost anything else because so many of those machines are still running, kept alive by operators who refuse to let them die. Number 9. The John Deere 743 Tree Harvester. In 1977, John Deere unveiled something the logging world had never seen, the 743 Tree Harvester. It combined the speed of a rubber-tired wheeled machine with an extending boom arm and a harvesting head that could fell a tree, delimit, and process it, all in a single pass. John Deere's own records describe it as allowing operators to harvest 2 trees per minute, setting the foundation for what modern harvesters would become. On paper, the 743 was a revolution. It was the first serious attempt by a major manufacturer to build a machine that did the work of multiple separate pieces of equipment in a single unit. In practice, the 743 was brutally difficult to operate and maintain. Operators who worked on early 743 machines describe a machine that was genuinely ahead of what the technology of the late 1970s could reliably support. The cab was supposed to have air conditioning, a significant feature at the time. But the system failed early and John Deere engineers could not reliably fix it under warranty, leaving operators in brutally hot conditions during summer operations. The delimbing system at the front of the machine created dangerous situations when trees got crossed or broke, with debris coming close to penetrating the operator's cab. Fire was a recurring problem, and the trees coming out of the processing head often fell in chaotic, unsorted piles that made life extremely difficult for the skidder operators who had to work behind it. Veterans of early 743 operations describe a machine that could, in ideal conditions, perform almost miraculous productivity, and then break down in a way that required sophisticated, specialized repair knowledge that almost no one in the field actually had. The 743 was eventually retired, replaced by more refined harvester designs that built on everything the 743 had proven, both what worked and what didn't. The concept the 743 pioneered, a single machine that fells, delimbs, and processes, is now the backbone of modern Scandinavian-style cut-to-length logging, one of the most efficient harvesting systems in the world. The 743 itself was a magnificent failure that made all of that possible. Number 10. The Timbco tracked feller buncher line. Pat Crawford built Timbco into one of the most respected names in tracked feller bunchers in North America during the 1970s and 1980s. In terrain where wheeled machines simply cannot work, steep Pacific Northwest slopes, wet and soft Canadian ground, mountain logging conditions in the Rockies and Appalachians, tracked machines are not optional. They are the only option. And in that world, the Timbco line became a benchmark. Tracked feller bunchers need to combine enormous raw power with careful balance on difficult terrain. A machine that's too heavy tips. A machine that's too light can't handle the trees it's trying to fell. A machine that's poorly balanced on a steep slope becomes a life-threatening liability the moment the ground changes. Timbco's machines were developed with the specific demands of heavy, steep slope and soft ground logging in mind. And operators who ran them in those conditions developed a loyalty to the brand that was fierce. The tracked fella buncher market of the 1970s was large and crowded, with brands including Allied, Barco, Liebherr, Fabtech, Koehring, IH, Case, Hi-Tech, Franklin, and Timberjack all competing alongside Timbco. By the time the market shook out in the late 1980s and early 1990s, many of those names had disappeared. Timbco had survived. But Crawford eventually sold the Timbco tracked line to Valmet, the Finnish forestry equipment giant. Valmet's forestry assets were later acquired by Komatsu, the Japanese heavy equipment company. The Timbco line survived under new ownership and eventually became the basis for what is now known as TimberPro, still building tracked fella bunches today from a direct lineage that goes back to Crawford's original machines. But the culture, the engineering philosophy, the specific feel and identity of Timbco under Pat Crawford, that was gone the moment the first sale papers were signed. Loggers who ran original Timbco machines through the 1980s will still tell you those were the best tracked fella bunches they ever sat in. And they ran in an era, 1950 to 2000, when logging machines were made to last a lifetime, not to last a lease cycle. So that's it for today. If you like this video, then please hit the like and subscribe button for more videos. Thanks for watching.